In the heart of an alien empire, a lone human lies trapped, his body frozen, his mind awake. The Hive, a race that conquers worlds with their psychic power, believes they've won. But one man, Captain Nathaniel Drake, has a secret. His mind is still free and his heart burns with revenge. The queen who thought she could break him will soon learn that humanity's will is stronger than any alien force. This is not the end. This is the beginning of their final stand. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. In the vast emptiness of space, there was only silence. Cold, endless, suffocating silence. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing existed, except for one lone figure drifting through the void. Captain Nathaniel Drake, the last survivor of Earth's elite vanguard team, floated in a small transparent pod. His body, pale and still, appeared lifeless to any who might observe. His eyes were closed, and his chest rose and fell slowly, as though he were sleeping. But Nathaniel was not asleep. His mind, locked within the confines of the pod, was wide awake, sharp as ever. He had been for days, 16 days to be exact. 16 days since his world had been torn apart. 16 days since the Hive had captured him, after his ship crashed and his team was slaughtered. The mission had been a failure, and the war, as far as anyone knew, was lost. But the Hive did not know that Nathaniel was still alive, still capable of fighting back. They thought him broken, a mere pawn to be discarded. They believed his mind was shattered, that the traumatic events had left him a helpless prisoner. They were wrong. The pod hummed softly as it continued its slow journey through the blackness of space. The blue light that bathed Nathaniel's body pulsed at a steady rhythm, keeping him alive, keeping his muscles from atrophying. He didn't need food or water. The pod's systems were designed to sustain him, to keep him in stasis, to keep him alive long enough for the Hive to interrogate him and figure out who had led the last failed human resistance. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken him. But they were gravely mistaken. Inside the pod, Nathaniel was fully aware of his surroundings. His body may have been frozen in place, but his mind was alert, always calculating, always watching. He had always been the observant type, quick to notice patterns, to read situations. This time, however, the stakes were much higher. The Hive were no ordinary foes. They were an alien race with a single-minded purpose: domination. They controlled minds. They conquered planets not through force of arms, but through the sheer power of their will. Their queen, Azalara, was a being unlike any Nathaniel had ever encountered. Her psychic abilities were enough to shatter entire civilizations. She didn't need to raise a hand to destroy her enemies. She could do it all with her mind. And yet, here he was, alive, still breathing, still waiting. For Nathaniel, the pod was both a prison and a sanctuary. It was where he was trapped, alone, isolated from the rest of the universe. But it was also the only place where he could think clearly. Out here in the cold, dark void of space, there were no distractions, no sounds, no lights, just time and space, endless and patient. Nathaniel had nothing but time, and he was using every second of it. As he floated through the darkness, his thoughts turned to his fallen comrades. They had been more than just teammates. They had been family. The mission had been simple: infiltrate the Hive's homeworld, gather intelligence, and strike at the heart of the alien empire. But nothing had gone according to plan. The Hive had anticipated their every move. The battle had been fierce and the price had been high. In the end, it had been Nathaniel who had survived. But at what cost? His ship had crashed, his crew had been wiped out, and the Hive had captured him, and yet he still lived. They had failed to break him. And for that, Nathaniel was thankful. The Hive had tried to read his mind, to invade his thoughts, to tear him apart from the inside. They were used to their victims crumbling under the weight of their mental power. But Nathaniel had a secret, a small chip implanted behind his ear, a piece of technology that blocked the hive's psychic probes. It was illegal, dangerous, and could have easily gotten him court-martialed if he had ever been caught using it. But in the circumstances, it had been a lifesaver. The chip prevented the hive from accessing his thoughts, from controlling him. They believed he was unconscious, that his mind was nothing more than a blank slate. They were wrong. In his isolation, Nathaniel could hear the hum of the pod's systems, the occasional clank of distant machinery, and the steady rhythm of his own breath. Every small sound, every vibration, was something he paid attention to. His senses were heightened. He counted every breath, every second that passed. Time had become his enemy and his ally. Each moment brought him closer to his destination, and each moment brought him closer to the opportunity he needed to strike back. The pod drifted silently toward its destination, the hive's throne world, a massive dark planet orbiting in the deepest reaches of space. The hive's home was no ordinary world. It was a place where the very air seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, a place where light itself seemed to be swallowed by darkness. It was here that the hive's queen, Azalara, ruled with an iron grip, commanding her insect-like soldiers with nothing but her thoughts. This was where Nathaniel's journey would end, one way or another. As the pod neared the planet, Nathaniel's mind raced with plans. He had to be ready. He had to remain calm. He had to wait for the right moment. The hive had no idea what was coming. They thought him a prisoner, a captive whose mind had been broken. But they had no idea that Nathaniel Drake was still in control. And when the time was right, he would show them the price of underestimating humanity. The ship moved closer to the surface, its destination growing ever nearer. But for now, Nathaniel could only wait. And in that waiting, he knew something the hive did not. The war was far from over. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before Nathaniel, yet it was the deep, suffocating silence inside the pod that truly made him feel small. He had lost track of how many days had passed since he was captured, but the pod was slowly approaching its destination. His mind, sharp as ever, was constantly alert, counting the minutes, the seconds, as he drifted deeper into the heart of the hive's empire. He had only one goal now: survival. But survival was not just about escaping. It was about something more. It was about ensuring that the hive would never have the chance to strike again. The hive was a force like no other. They didn't need weapons to conquer worlds or enslave species. They had something much more terrifying: their minds. The hive's queen, Azalara, could dominate entire populations with a mere thought, bending them to her will. Her psychic power could crush armies, shatter defenses, and destroy any enemy who dared to challenge her. And now, Nathaniel was there, captive, alone and vulnerable, seemingly helpless against their might. But as the pod drifted toward its destination, Nathaniel was far from helpless. He wasn't broken, nor was he afraid. The hive's grip tightened around him as the pod neared its destination, the hive's throne world. This was where their empire began, where the queen ruled with absolute authority. The throne world was no ordinary planet. Its surface was jagged, twisted, and dark, almost alive, as though the land itself had grown from the bones of its fallen victims. The atmosphere was thick, toxic, and unnaturally still, a place that could drive anyone mad just by breathing its air. There was no sunlight, only a constant, sickly glow that came from the planet's strange rivers of green liquid flowing, like veins across the ground. It was a planet that resembled death itself, a world that demanded surrender the moment you set foot on it. Nathaniel's pod entered the orbit of the throne world, and immediately, the hive's machines took control. They didn't need to manually guide it. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. Massive glowing claws made of light surrounded the pod, pulling it through the thick clouds and storms that churned around the planet's surface. It was as if the world itself was alive, reaching out with unnatural force to bring him closer, to its heart, to the very source of its power. The pod was drawn into the depths of the hive's lair, toward the queen who ruled this twisted place. As the pod descended toward the planet's surface, Nathaniel could feel the change. The air grew heavier, thicker. The atmosphere inside the pod was perfectly controlled, but he could still sense the oppressive weight of the hive's power pressing down on him, almost like a physical force. It was a constant reminder that he was no longer on Earth. He was deep within enemy territory, surrounded by creatures that could break his mind with a mere thought. But Nathaniel refused to give in. He had survived far worse, and he wasn't going to let this be the end. The pod finally landed with a soft, almost imperceptible thud. The metal doors hissed open, and the harsh, alien light from the outside world flooded in. Nathaniel's body remained still, his arms limp at his sides, his chest rising and falling at a steady, controlled pace. He appeared to be unconscious, vulnerable to whatever the hive had planned for him. But Nathaniel's mind was far from passive. Every part of him was alert, constantly observing, constantly calculating. He took note of every movement, every detail, every sound. The guards surrounding the pod were tall, insect-like creatures, their sharp, segmented limbs twitching with anticipation. Their red eyes glowed with an eerie light as they watched him, waiting for him to stir. But Nathaniel made no move. He couldn't let them know that he was aware. He couldn't let them see that he was still in control. The guards spoke not with words, but through their thoughts. They communicated in the same way that the hive communicated, through the mind. It was an unsettling experience for Nathaniel, but he had trained himself for this. He could block out their voices, their thoughts, just as he had blocked out the Queen's probes back in the pod. For now, he needed to remain still. He needed to let them believe he was helpless, broken. But Nathaniel wasn't just playing dead. He was studying the hive's movements, observing their routines, memorizing the layout of the chamber he was being carried through. Every door, every hallway, every sound, he was filing it away in his mind. He had to be ready. The hive had their claws in him, but they didn't realize that he wasn't as vulnerable as they thought. The guards carried him deeper into the hive's domain, moving past walls lined with strange, glowing crystals, past chambers filled with the pulsating remains of species the hive had conquered. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic energy, as if the very foundation of the hive was alive. It was a place of unimaginable terror, a place where resistance was crushed before it even had a chance to form. Nathaniel was finally brought to a large chamber, its walls alive with the pulsating green light that filled the hive's stronghold. It was here that the Queen Azalara awaited him. The guards dropped to their knees as they laid him before her, the Queen's presence palpable in the air. She floated down from her throne, an imposing figure that seemed to radiate power. She was both insect and shadow, her form shifting in and out of focus as though she were part of the very darkness that surrounded them. Azalara circled Nathaniel's body, her black eyes studying him. "You do not speak," she said, her voice soft and smooth, yet filled with a cold, deadly promise. "But you hear me, don't you?" She reached out, probing his mind with her psychic power, trying to tear into him, trying to break him. But Nathaniel was not so easily controlled. He remained silent, his mind locked tight against her influence. The hive had underestimated him before. They would do so again. Nathaniel's body remained still, lifeless even, as the hive's guards lifted him from the pod and carried him deeper into the heart of their empire. The chamber around them was cold, sterile, and dark, with the faint glow of alien symbols etched into the walls, pulsating in slow rhythm. The hive's stronghold, built deep within the bowels of their world, was a place of cold efficiency. Nothing here was meant to comfort or sustain. It was a place of dominance where all living things existed only to serve the hive, to submit. And Nathaniel, the lone human left, had been brought here to be tested, to be broken. But Nathaniel was not easily broken. As the guards moved through the dark corridors, their insect-like eyes glowing with an unsettling light, Nathaniel could feel the weight of their gazes on him, even though his body was limp and his breathing slow. He had learned long ago that his only chance for survival was patience. He had to remain still, pretend to be weak, pretend to be helpless. If they thought he was just another prisoner to be crushed, then they would lower their guard. He had to wait. He had to let the hive believe they controlled him, because the moment they did, the moment they let their own confidence slip, he would strike. The air in the hive's fortress was thick, and the faint hum of machinery filled the silence. The guards moved with eerie precision, and Nathaniel could feel their presence, their cold intelligence as they brought him closer to the center of the hive's domain. He had no illusions about what would happen next. The queen, Azalara, was not just a ruler, she was a creature of immense power, capable of reading minds, bending wills, and crushing resistance with a mere thought. She had destroyed entire civilizations, brought entire worlds to their knees without lifting a finger. She was the heart of the hive, and now she would test him. The guard stopped before a massive dark chamber, its walls glowing faintly with an unnatural green light. At the center of the room sat the queen's throne, an ominous structure that seemed to pulse with life, its surface alive with shifting patterns like a living thing. It was as if the very throne had been grown, not built. The queen herself was seated there, her form almost indistinguishable from the shadows that surrounded her. She was tall and thin, her body an unsettling mixture of human-like grace and insectoid terror. Her face was pale, with eyes that seemed to swallow the light, endless black voids that pierced into anyone who met her gaze. Azalara looked at Nathaniel, her gaze unwavering as she floated down from her throne. She moved like a shadow, her body gliding across the floor with unnerving speed, a presence that was both captivating and terrifying. The air seemed to grow colder as she approached, and Nathaniel could feel the oppressive weight of her power pressing in on him. She circled him slowly as if sizing him up, examining this strange human who had somehow managed to survive everything the hive had thrown at him. To her, he was a puzzle, an anomaly. She had never encountered a being like him before. The hive was used to total dominance, to the crushing of all resistance. But Nathaniel, despite being captured and stripped of his freedom, remained silent. He had not spoken a word since his capture, not even when the hive had tried to invade his mind. "You do not speak." Azalara's voice echoed inside Nathaniel's skull, soft, cold, and unsettling. "But you hear me, don't you?" Her words were not spoken aloud, but they entered his mind, reverberating through his thoughts. She reached out with her psychic power, probing his mind like a needle searching for a weakness. Nathaniel's eyes remained closed, his body still. But inside his mind he was fully alert, pushing back against her intrusive thoughts, locking his mind behind an invisible wall. The queen's eyes narrowed, her tendrils of psychic energy lashing out with greater force, probing deeper into his consciousness. She was trying to find something, anything to break him, but all she found was silence, and a strange coldness. There was no fear, no despair. She expected those emotions, those signs of weakness, but instead Nathaniel was calm. His mind was a fortress, locked tight, resistant to her psychic assault. The more she pressed, the more she felt something strange rising within her. A flicker of confusion. Her mind recoiled for a brief moment, and in that instant she realized something. Nathaniel was not like the others. She had expected panic, terror, or at least some form of resistance she could crush. But there was none. He was different. The absence of emotion disturbed her. The hive had destroyed entire species without a second thought, and yet this human, this lone survivor, was not swayed. He remained steadfast, unbroken. The queen's confusion deepened and her anger began to stir. How could this insignificant creature resist her? But then, as she pressed further, seeking to understand, a flood of images hit her mind. Images of fire, destruction, death. Faces of soldiers running through the smoke, explosions tearing through the sky. Screams filled her mind. And in the midst of it all, she saw something that stopped her cold. It was a face, a woman's face, smiling, then disappearing into the chaos. A memory of something dear to Nathaniel, something precious. The queen's mind recoiled, almost as if it had been burned by the intensity of the emotion it encountered. She had expected fear, But all she found was an overwhelming drive for vengeance, a thirst for justice that burned hotter than the firestorm she had glimpsed. Nathaniel's heart pulsed with quiet rage, not the uncontrolled fury she had expected, but a cold, controlled anger that simmered just beneath the surface. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't broken. He was waiting, calculating, and most importantly, he was focused. Azalara realized then that she was not dealing with an ordinary prisoner. This human was not like the others. He had something the Hive had never encountered, a will of iron, a determination to survive and to fight, no matter the odds. Azalara, for the first time, felt something she had never experienced before. Fear. Not of failure, but of this human, this one man who refused to bend to her will. And in that moment, she knew that this would not be an easy conquest. Nathaniel was not just another pawn to be played. He was a force, and the Queen had made the mistake of underestimating him. The throne room was bathed in an eerie green light, casting long shadows across the walls that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Nathaniel lay before the Queen, still as ever, his body appearing lifeless, his face cold and distant. The Hive's guards knelt in perfect unison, their insectoid forms bent in submission to their Queen, waiting for her next command. But even as they stood in reverence, something had changed. The air was thick with tension, a sense that something was about to break. Nathaniel was not the broken prisoner they had expected. He was still a man, still a soldier, and the Hive was about to learn the price of underestimating him. Azalara floated above him, her eyes glowing black, infinite and deep, like endless voids that devoured all light. She circled him, inspecting him, her psychic tendrils reaching out, trying once again to pry into his mind. But this time, Nathaniel did not resist. He let her probe, let her invade, knowing it would only confirm what she feared. He was not like the others. He was not broken. He was waiting. She couldn't see it, but deep within him his mind was alive, calculating, ready. Every second, every movement, every breath was a countdown. The time to strike was coming. The Queen's voice slithered into Nathaniel's mind, soft but filled with an undeniable power. "You think you can defeat me?" she asked, her words sharp and cold, a whispered threat that echoed through his thoughts. "You are nothing, just a human, weak, fragile. You have no chance." Her words dripped with venom, and yet Nathaniel felt no fear, no doubt. He had no time for her words. He had no time for her games. Inside, Nathaniel's heart raced, but his breathing remained steady, controlled. He had trained for moments like this, moments where every detail mattered, where patience was key. His body may have been trapped in this Hive's lair, but his will was not. The chip behind his ear, the secret that had kept him safe from the Queen's psychic grasp, had only one purpose: to keep him alive long enough for this. Azalara's face twisted into a cold smile, her black eyes narrowing as she began to press harder, pushing against his mind with increasing force. She wanted him to break, wanted him to beg for mercy. But Nathaniel remained silent. His mind was a wall, solid and unyielding. She grew more frustrated, her psychic presence growing stronger, more invasive, more desperate. But still, nothing. No emotion, no fear, no resistance. It drove her mad. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A slight twitch in his fingers, a slight shift in his posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. The guards had been watching him, expecting him to remain as still as a corpse. They didn't notice. They couldn't see the shift, couldn't sense the movement. Nathaniel had waited for this moment, and now, as Azalara's focus was entirely on breaking him, he struck. The nanite chip embedded in his body, the one that had kept him alive and hidden from the Hive's psychic control, activated. A wave of energy pulsed through him, coursing through his muscles, waking them from their forced stillness. Nathaniel's body sprang to life, faster than the Hive could react. In one swift motion, He pulled himself from the ground, launching forward. With deadly precision, the guards, still kneeling, barely had time to raise their weapons before Nathaniel was upon them. His strength, built up over days of silence and observation, tore through their defenses. One by one the guards fell, their insectoid bodies crumpling to the ground in a tangled mess of broken limbs. As Alara's eyes widened in shock, her once confident gaze now filled with disbelief. "How?" she hissed, her voice filled with venom and frustration. "How could you?" But Nathaniel didn't wait for her to finish. He was already on the move. With the guards down, he turned his attention to the queen. Azalara's power was immense, but Nathaniel's resolve was stronger. His mind, his body, everything about him was focused on one thing now: her. She had underestimated him, believed him to be a mere pawn, a broken soldier. But Nathaniel had never been just that. He had been a leader, a fighter, and above all, a survivor. Azalara reached out with her psychic power, trying to ensnare him, trying to stop him. Tendrils of energy lashed out at him, attempting to wrap around his mind, to crush him. But Nathaniel was ready. With every step, with every move, he pushed back against her, countering her psychic assault with a force of will that she had never encountered before. The queen's power faltered, her control slipping as Nathaniel closed the distance between them. She could feel it, the change in the air, the shift in the balance of power. In a final, desperate attempt to maintain control, Azalara unleashed everything she had, sending a wave of psychic energy so powerful that it shook the very walls of the chamber. But Nathaniel in that moment reached for something deep within him, something primal, something that had been forged in the fires of battle and loss. With one last surge of strength, he blocked her attack, and then, in a single movement, he plunged forward. The queen's eyes widened in fear, but it was too late. Nathaniel's hands gripped her throat, his fingers tightening with the fury of a man who had lost everything. He could feel her life slipping away, the force of her power draining as she struggled against him, but it was futile. The Hive Queen, the invincible ruler of this dark empire, was finally at the mercy of the human she had once considered nothing more than a pawn. Azalara's body went limp, and with it, the oppressive weight of the hives. Power began to lift. The room, once filled with her dark energy, began to feel lighter, freer. Nathaniel stood over her, breathing heavily, his heart racing as the realization of what he had just done sank in. The hive's reign of terror had ended. For the first time in days, Nathaniel allowed himself to breathe freely. He had come to this place to finish the war, and now, as he stood victorious, he knew that humanity's fight was far from over, but this battle, at least, was won.